Have you ever wondered why, no matter how hard you try, the financial system seems designed to keep you trapped? Imagine a world where every dollar you earn, every investment you make, every plan you create is already part of a script written centuries ago, one you can never escape. This is not a theory or a conspiracy. It's a reality that has shaped nations, destroyed empires, and ensured that power and wealth remain in the hands of a few, while the rest of the world is forced to pay, over and over again. The truth is unsettling. The financial system you live in was carefully crafted by architects who understood human behavior, greed, and control, and they built it so that debt is not an accident. It is permanent, unavoidable, and engineered to expand continuously. You might think that with hard work, smart investments, or luck, you could bypass the trap, but the reality is harsher. The patterns of history are clear. Countries, companies, and individuals who try to escape this structure without understanding its rules inevitably get pulled back in, sometimes at catastrophic cost. From Europe in the 17th century to modern global finance today, the same mechanisms repeat. Governments borrowing endlessly, interest flowing upward to institutions and families who control the system, while ordinary citizens carry the burden silently. And right now, in 2025, the structure is more intricate, more interconnected, and more difficult to outrun than ever before. You already feel its impact: rising costs of living, debt that never seems to end, financial promises that fail to deliver. But here's the critical point. Awareness is power. Understanding the mechanics, the invisible hands guiding money, is the first step to seeing how the game is played, and maybe finding a way to navigate it more wisely. You might be asking yourself, is there a way out? The answer is complex, but what you're about to discover will change the way you think about your money, your government, and the global economy. Fixa comigo até o final, because what you're going to uncover next might surprise you, challenge everything you believe, and open your eyes to forces that operate silently around you every day. And before we dive deeper, I want to ask you, have you ever felt trapped in a financial cycle that seems impossible to escape? Leave a comment sharing your experience, hit like if this resonates, and check if you're subscribed so you can follow every step as we unravel how this system was built, why it continues, and what it means for you. The story we're about to explore is not just history, it's happening right now, and the patterns we'll reveal are as precise as they are shocking. The origins of the debt traps stretch back centuries, to a time when the foundations of modern finance were being laid, long before digital currencies or global markets existed. It all began with a simple yet revolutionary concept. What if governments could borrow money endlessly, never repay the principal, and still function? This idea was first implemented in England in 1694 when a group of wealthy merchants and bankers created a mechanism to lend funds to the crown for war, with one extraordinary condition: the debt would never truly be repaid. Instead, interest would be paid perpetually, guaranteeing that the flow of money remained constant. At the heart of this system was the newly established Bank of England, a seemingly neutral institution that was, in fact, the key to controlling an entire nation's financial destiny. Every bond issued became both money and income for the holders, creating a permanent stream of wealth from taxpayers to a select group of elite financiers. This model was replicated across Europe, giving rise to an invisible, self-sustaining network of debt that intertwined governments, banks, and citizens. Over the decades, the system evolved, becoming more sophisticated, more interconnected, and more difficult to escape. Each crisis, each war, and each recession was absorbed not by the elite, but by the general population, reinforcing the structure while masking its permanence. The brilliance and the danger of this design is its invisibility. Debt becomes part of daily life, woven into taxation, public services, and personal finance, so that its existence is taken for granted. People think of borrowing as temporary, a tool, a step toward progress, yet the system ensures it is anything but. When governments, corporations, and individuals operate within this framework, they are bound by rules they do not fully see. By the 19th century, the Rothschilds and other banking dynasties had industrialized sovereign debt, creating tradable financial instruments that link nations in a web of interdependent obligations. If one country defaulted, it could trigger losses across borders, yet the system was engineered to continue functioning indefinitely through refinances, bailouts, and structured repayment plans. This historical architecture explains why, even today, the world owes trillions to itself, why debt never disappears, and why the wealthy continue to profit from the mechanics of interest and leverage. The system is not failing. It is performing exactly as designed, and the more we borrow, the more entrenched it becomes. Every loan, every bond, every policy decision is a thread in a vast network of control, and those who understand the pattern gain a clarity that the rest of the world rarely sees. What you are witnessing is not accidental chaos. It is centuries of engineering, perfected, refined, and maintained to ensure that power, capital, and influence remain concentrated, while the general population remains caught in a cycle that looks voluntary but is anything but. As the debt system matured, it evolved from a clever mechanism into a global structure that now dictates the fate of entire nations. By the 19th and early 20th centuries, the financial web had expanded far beyond England, stretching across Europe and eventually to the Americas. Governments were no longer just borrowing to survive. They were borrowing to grow, to wage wars, to build empires, all under the guidance of banking families who understood the power of perpetuating debt. The Rothschilds, in particular, transformed the financial landscape, creating international networks of sovereign bonds that allowed them to move capital faster than any nation could react. By industrializing debt, they turned loans into tradable commodities, connecting multiple countries in a system where the failure of one government could ripple across borders, threatening stability but also reinforcing the central power of those who controlled the flow. In this way, debt became self-reinforcing. The more nations borrowed, the more institutions profited, and the more the system demanded continued participation. This pattern is not a relic. It is alive today in the global financial architecture. Modern central banks, from the Federal Reserve in the United States to the European Central Bank, operate on the same principles refined over centuries. Governments issue bonds that are immediately purchased with newly created money, interest flows perpetually, and the cycle repeats. It is a system designed to expand, not to resolve. Ordinary citizens often perceive debt as temporary or personal, yet in reality it is structural and inevitable. National budgets, public pensions, and even private mortgages feed into this complex ecosystem, linking everyday decisions to centuries-old financial engineering. Every crisis, whether a recession, market crash, or sovereign default, reinforces the system rather than undermines it. Bailouts, restructuring, and refinancing are not failures. They are continuations, ensuring that interest continues to flow upward and that power remains concentrated. The history of debt shows us a consistent pattern: the creation of money from borrowing, the industrialization of debt instruments, and the perpetuation of a system where failure is impossible for the elite, but inevitable for the general population. Understanding this history is crucial because it illuminates why modern financial crises occur, why governments rarely default, and why ordinary citizens remain vulnerable to forces far beyond their control. What may feel like economic instability is, in fact, the predictable rhythm of a centuries-old design that has survived revolutions, depressions, and wars. And now, as global debt exceeds $315 trillion, the system is at its most intricate and interconnected stage, leaving no room for escape, only navigation within a structure built to perpetuate itself indefinitely. By the early 20th century, the debt system had become a machine that governments could not escape. Central banks were no longer mere facilitators. They were the operators of a self-sustaining cycle, ensuring that money creation, borrowing, and interest payments remained uninterrupted. The Federal Reserve in the United States, established in 1913, exemplifies this evolution. What appeared as a neutral institution was, in practice, the engine that guaranteed endless borrowing, perpetual interest, and the consolidation of wealth among private banking institutions. This system is subtle yet omnipresent. Government spending, public debt, corporate borrowing, and even personal loans all feed into the same loop. The mechanics are simple but profound. When governments borrow, they issue bonds. These bonds are purchased with money created out of thin air. Taxes are then collected from the population to pay interest, ensuring that the flow of wealth moves upward from citizens to institutions controlling the system. Defaults are engineered to be impossible because any failure threatens a wider financial collapse. Over time, this has created a global web connecting nations, banks, and investors in a delicate yet unbreakable balance. Every economic crisis, from the Great Depression to the 2008 financial meltdown, follows this pattern. Governments borrow more, central banks inject liquidity, interest continues to flow, and the underlying structure remains intact. Meanwhile, ordinary people bear the cost through inflation, higher taxes, stagnant wages, and rising debt. The genius and the danger of the system is its invisibility. It feels normal, inevitable even, but it was carefully designed to perpetuate itself, to create the appearance of choice while leaving little room to escape. This is why, even in times of economic growth, the average citizen often feels trapped, powerless, against forces that have been meticulously organized over centuries. Now, here is the crucial question for you. Have you ever noticed how no matter how hard you try, debts, financial obligations, and systemic pressures seem to persist and multiply? As the system matured, it became clear that its primary function was to concentrate wealth and influence rather than merely fund governments or facilitate commerce. The architects of modern finance, from Patterson to Rothschild to Morgan and Volcker, constructed mechanisms where interest payments flowed continuously upward. creating a feedback loop that guaranteed perpetual profit for those who controlled the bonds, the banks, and the currency. Nations became dependent on borrowing not because they lacked resources, but because the very structure of the system demanded it. Every war, every infrastructure project, every social program was leveraged, financed through instruments that ensured repayment was nearly impossible without generating new debt. This was the invisible architecture of power: governments borrowing endlessly, central banks ensuring liquidity, and citizens effectively subsidizing the wealth of a few through taxes and inflation. The elegance and danger of the design lay in its invisibility. To most people, debt feels like a temporary problem, a burden that can be managed or repaid. In reality, it is a permanent feature, meticulously engineered over centuries to appear optional while being inescapable. Globalization amplified this effect. By the 20th and 21st centuries, economies were intertwined. U.S. Treasury bonds were held by foreign governments, Japanese institutions, and European banks. Defaults anywhere could trigger cascading consequences. Yet the system was resilient by design, always propped up by coordinated interventions, bailouts, and refinancing programs. Corporations, pension funds, and individual investors became both beneficiaries and enforcers of the system, dependent on continuous debt cycles for profits and stability. Even crises, like the 1982 Latin American debt crisis or the 2008 global financial meltdown, were absorbed and re-engineered to reinforce the network rather than dismantle it. Ordinary citizens bore the brunt. Inflation eroded savings, wage growth stagnated, and access to essential goods became dependent on credit, embedding them deeper into the system. Understanding this is crucial. The patterns are not random. They are the outcome of deliberate engineering, a centuries-old design that treats debt as the foundation of modern finance. While it appears as chaos or complexity, the underlying logic is simple. Perpetual borrowing ensures perpetual control. Those who understand this see the system for what it truly is, not a series of accidental crises, but a machine built to extract wealth, concentrate power, and guarantee that, for most of humanity, freedom from debt is an illusion. The question is not whether the system works, it works perfectly, but whether anyone can navigate it without being absorbed. By the mid-20th century, the system had reached an unprecedented level of sophistication, combining the lessons of centuries into a network that spanned the globe. The creation of the Federal Reserve, the internationalization of debt, and the emergence of interconnected markets allowed governments to borrow endlessly while ensuring that interest payments flowed without interruption. Every policy, from fiscal stimulus to quantitative easing, was integrated into a framework that guaranteed the survival of the network, regardless of individual crises. What is critical to understand is that the system is designed to absorb shocks, not to correct them. When a nation faces a debt crisis, the solution is rarely forgiveness or reduction. Instead, the response is refinancing, bailouts, or structural adjustments, mechanisms that perpetuate debt and reinforce control. This is why countries like Mexico in 1982, Greece in 2010, and Argentina repeatedly fall into cycles of debt. The problem is not mismanagement, it is the design. Interest payments continue flowing, institutions profit, and ordinary citizens remain bound within the system, often unaware of the historical patterns that dictate their circumstances. Corporations and investors have adapted, aligning their strategies to take advantage of government borrowing, central bank interventions, and market fluctuations. The system incentivizes leverage, speculation, and accumulation at every level. Yet, the public perceives these dynamics as chance or policy failure, rarely understanding that the underlying structure is deliberate and enduring. International coordination further entrenches this framework. Institutions like the IMF, World Bank, and central banking alliances ensure that debt is managed globally, never eliminated. Sovereign defaults are mitigated through structured assistance, often with conditions that erode autonomy while sustaining payments. This creates a self-reinforcing loop. Debt never disappears, wealth continues to flow upward, and control becomes more concentrated. By examining historical patterns, it becomes clear that the system operates not through randomness, but through precise mechanisms designed for continuity. Economic shocks, political instability, and social crises are absorbed and redirected, maintaining the network rather than dismantling it. The modern global economy is not a series of disconnected events. It is the culmination of centuries of engineering, where every intervention, bailout, and policy reinforces the perpetual cycle of debt and power. Understanding this pattern allows us to see that what may appear as chaos is, in fact, the predictable operation of a system designed to survive, expand, and maintain control, leaving very few truly outside its influence. As the system entrenched itself in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the mechanisms of control became both more subtle and more pervasive. Modern finance operates on a global stage, where currencies, bonds, and derivatives interconnect nations in a web that leaves little room for escape. Debt is no longer a local problem. It is a structural feature of the global economy. When one country struggles, others are immediately implicated through exposure to sovereign bonds, international loans, and trade obligations. The institutions that design the framework, central banks, global investment firms, and financial dynasties, remain the primary beneficiaries. The extraordinary scale of debt accumulation today is staggering. Over $315 trillion globally, connecting governments, corporations, and households in a continuous cycle of borrowing, interest, and refinancing. What makes this system invisible to most is how smoothly it operates. Crises appear episodic, solutions seem temporary, and yet the underlying structure remains untouched. Policies like quantitative easing, bailouts, and international financial interventions are all designed to sustain the cycle, ensuring that wealth continues to flow upward while ordinary citizens carry the burden. Social and economic pressures mount, stagnant wages, rising costs, and shrinking opportunities are all part of the equilibrium that the system maintains. Here's the key question for you. Have you noticed how every economic downturn seems to enrich the few, while leaving the majority struggling? Comment below with your experiences, observations, or frustrations with the financial system. Your perspective is valuable because it reveals how deeply this network affects real lives. The impact of this financial system on individual lives is profound, often invisible, and yet unavoidable. Every citizen participates in a cycle of debt, credit, and interest, whether they realize it or not. From mortgages and student loans to credit cards and personal financing, ordinary people are constantly navigating a framework designed centuries ago to extract value upward. Inflation, taxation, and economic policy decisions all feed into this system, subtly redistributing wealth and consolidating power. Families work harder just to maintain the same standard of living, while the mechanisms of finance ensure that no matter how much effort is invested, true financial independence remains elusive. Governments rely on debt to fund public services, but the interest owed always flows toward financial institutions and investors who control the bonds. Corporations borrow to grow, invest, and leverage, but the returns ultimately favor shareholders and institutional entities positioned at the top of the financial hierarchy. Even seemingly small policy changes or market fluctuations can cascade across the global network, affecting employment, purchasing power, and the cost of essential goods. The system ensures dependence. People need access to credit to buy homes, cars, education, and healthcare, but every dollar borrowed is a thread tying them to a larger economic machinery. Historical patterns repeat here as well. Nations, empires, and corporations that once attempted to break free from debt cycles were either pulled back in or penalized through economic or political consequences. The modern economy mirrors these dynamics on a global scale, where interconnectedness guarantees that crises are rarely isolated and financial shocks propagate quickly. For instance, a default in one region can affect stock markets worldwide, trigger currency devaluation, and increase interest rates everywhere. This interdependence reinforces compliance. The system survives because participants, knowingly or unknowingly, are bound by mutual reliance and fear of collapse. Understanding this reality is crucial because it reframes the way we think about personal finance, national debt, and economic policy. Individuals are not merely navigating isolated choices. They are operating within a centuries-old framework engineered to perpetuate wealth concentration and economic dependence. Recognizing this pattern provides clarity. The challenges of modern life, from stagnant wages to rising costs, are not accidents or failures. They are the predictable outcomes of a system designed to endure, evolve, and maintain control over every financial decision made on a global scale. The global nature of the financial system ensures that no nation operates in isolation. Every economic decision, every issuance of debt, every adjustment in interest rates is intertwined with multiple countries, institutions, and financial instruments. When one government borrows, another holds the debt. When one central bank injects liquidity, global markets react instantly. The United States Treasury bonds, for example, are held not only domestically, but also by foreign governments, pension funds, and multinational corporations. Japan, China, and European nations all participate in this network, creating a web where every obligation is connected and every default could trigger cascading consequences. This interdependence was not accidental. It was meticulously constructed to ensure the survival and perpetuation of the system. By creating a framework where governments, corporations, and citizens are all linked through obligations, interest payments, and financial contracts, the architects of modern finance ensured that the machinery would continue regardless of crises or political changes. Economic shocks, whether from currency fluctuations, trade imbalances, or sovereign defaults, are absorbed, restructured, and redirected, keeping the network intact. In effect, the world owes money to itself, yet the flow of wealth is consistently upward to those who control the institutions, the currency, and the markets. Corporations and investment firms operate within this global structure, leveraging interconnected debt and credit to maximize returns, while ordinary citizens face inflation, stagnant wages, and rising costs that tie them deeper into the system. This network also explains why interventions like IMF loans, quantitative easing, and coordinated monetary policy are so persistent. They are not temporary measures, but integral parts of a design that maintains debt as an inescapable constant. Understanding these connections is essential to grasping why individual actions, national policies, or local economic reforms rarely escape the gravitational pull of global finance. The interconnectivity guarantees that risks and rewards are shared unevenly, ensuring that those at the center of the network continue to benefit, while the majority absorb instability and systemic pressure. The pattern is clear. Crises are never isolated, debt is never eliminated, and power remains concentrated. By seeing the world as an interconnected financial ecosystem, it becomes apparent that the challenges we experience, market volatility, rising costs, stagnant wages, and debt dependence, are not anomalies. They are the predictable outcomes of a centuries-old design that operates invisibly yet consistently, linking everyone in a global system from which there is no true escape, only navigation, within the rules set long before we were born. Now that you understand the scope and intricacy of the global financial system, it becomes clear that what seems like chaos, crises, or random economic events is, in fact, a meticulously engineered structure designed to endure, expand, and concentrate wealth. Governments, central banks, corporations, and financial dynasties all operate within rules set centuries ago, ensuring that debt is permanent, interest continues to flow, and the majority of people remain bound within the system, often without realizing it. Yet understanding this pattern offers an unprecedented advantage. Knowledge allows us to see the invisible mechanisms at play, recognize the recurring cycles of crisis and control, and make more informed decisions in our personal and professional lives. The system works perfectly for those who understand it, and unpredictably for those who do not. But awareness changes the game. If you followed this exploration to this point, it shows that you're paying attention, and that insight matters. I encourage you to leave a comment with the phrase, "This message was for me," if you've grasped the reality of how the system operates. Share your thoughts, questions, or revelations. Hit like to indicate that you value this perspective and want to see more content that exposes these hidden patterns. Make sure you're subscribed, because understanding these mechanisms is essential as future events unfold. And the next insights could change the way you view money, governments, and global finance. And while this video has revealed the hidden architecture of perpetual debt, there's even more to explore. There's another video waiting that complements this discussion, showing practical examples of how these patterns play out in today's economy. Click over and continue with me, because the story doesn't end here. The system's influence is ongoing, and the deeper you understand it, the better equipped you are to navigate a world designed to keep most people inside its invisible boundaries.